There aren't many capital cities where Vladimir Putin can land his presidential plane anymore, fewer still where he would receive such a publicly warm and effusive welcome. Despite his pariah status, the red carpet was rolled out in New Delhi, with a surprise at the end. Prime Minister Narendra Modi hadn't informed Moscow he'd be leading the welcome party himself, with not just a handshake, but a warm embrace too. If an airport pickup is a sign of strength in a romance, between states it's an even stronger signal of partnership. There was even a protocol-breaking car ride together, with an Instagram portrait to make it official. Smiling as they rode to the Prime Minister's residence, Modi posted, "Delighted to welcome my friend President Putin to India. India-Russia friendship is a time-tested one that has greatly benefited our people." These images might confuse observers in the West after Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine and alleged war crimes, given India's own struggles for independence from British colonialism. But India and Russia have had a strong strategic relationship going back decades to the Soviet era. So strong, in fact, that this is the 23rd annual bilateral summit between the two countries, during which they're expected to sign a number of trade deals, despite growing pressure on India from the US and Europe to stop buying Russian oil. Putin was happy to take to Indian TV to defend the relationship.
Certain actors clearly dislike India's growing role in international markets owing to its ties with Russia. Consequently, they're seeking means to constrain India's influence for political reasons by imposing artificial obstacles.
For Russia, with its oil heavily embargoed in the West, India's population of 1.5 billion, making it the world's third biggest petroleum consumer, means it's a prized lifeline. Indeed, before the invasion, only 2.5% of India's oil purchases were from Russia. That figure has jumped to 35% now, thanks to some discounting. There have been consequences, though, with the US slapping an additional 25% tariff on Indian goods, arguing that purchasing from Putin helps fund the Kremlin's war chest. Modi has reduced his purchasing since, but is still happy to defend his friend.
The welfare of the world lies only on the path of peace. All of us should look for peaceful ways. Looking at the efforts being made in the last few days, I firmly believe that the world would return to the path of peace.
This morning, Putin received a 21-gun salute and a guard of honor at the Indian president's house. The foundation of the two countries' relationship has long been weapons, with India being a customer all the way back to the days of the USSR. Modi plans to purchase state-of-the-art Russian Su-57 fighter jets and S-400 missile air defense systems. They're also expected to close a $2 billion deal to lease Russian nuclear-powered submarines for a period of 10 years. With deals also agreed on passenger jets, a tourist visa scheme, and the Russia Today network opening a bureau in India, the pair visited Mahatma Gandhi's memorial, with Putin leaving a telling entry in the guest book, writing, "Gandhi essentially anticipated the new, more just, multipolar world order that is currently taking shape, and these are precisely the principles and values that Russia and India are defending together on the international stage today." Gandhi, however, was known across the world as a man who pursued his objectives through non-violence, not a strategy Putin is known for employing. Still, it's a message he doubled down on at their joint press conference.
Russia and India pursue independent and sovereign foreign policies, together with like-minded partners in BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and other countries of the global majority. We are advancing efforts to build a fairer and more democratic, multipolar world order.
Through the BRICS alliance of countries in the global south and other forums, the Kremlin has led the charge in disrupting the post-war international order. Arguably the biggest prize for Putin is India's continued cooperation and support of this endeavour. Joining us now is Dr. Kshitij Bajpai, who is a Senior Research Fellow in the Asia-Pacific Programme at Chatham House. Doctor, firstly, what do you make of the lavish reception Putin has received from Prime Minister Modi?
Well, I think, in one way, the visit by President Putin to India can be considered as routine. The Indian and Russian leaders, they tend to meet regularly. Putin and Modi have met at least 20 times since Modi became prime minister in 2014. However, when we place it in a broader geopolitical context, I think it's clearly a significant visit. It's Putin's first visit to India in 4 years, notably his first since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. For India, I think it demonstrates that New Delhi maintains a diversified and independent foreign policy, that it's not beholden to the whims of the Trump administration amid the recent downturn in India-US relations. And for Russia, I think it shows that it's not isolated despite Western sanctions. And then I think more practically, I think it shows it's an attempt by both countries to essentially compensate for India having to reduce its dependence or imports of Russian oil amid Western sanctions. So they're trying to essentially diversify the economic relationship and essentially pursue a more balanced trading relationship between both countries.
Going to the airport, though, and personally collecting Putin in his own car is a strong signal. What is Modi trying to say to Europe and the US, who imposed those sanctions earlier this year?
Well, I think clearly, I mean, as you mentioned, the fact that Modi was there to welcome him at the airport. He gave him a hug. They've traveled in the same car together. They had a private dinner last night. I think Modi's referred to the relations between both countries as the North Star in a changing world. It clearly shows that India values this relationship with Russia, that it's not going to abandon its long-standing relationship with Moscow. It's referred to it as a special and privileged strategic partnership. And it's a relationship that matters to New Delhi, both for practical and for ideological reasons. On the practical side, cooperation spans such areas as space, energy, defense cooperation. And then there's, I think, also a strong ideological or historical component to that relationship, which I think is often overlooked in the West, particularly among an older generation of Indian policymakers. There's still a high degree of affinity towards Moscow and the crucial role that the then Soviet Union played in supporting India during the Cold War.
Yeah, decades-long relationship. As things stand now, in terms of energy, India's Russian oil consumption has jumped from around 2% before the invasion of Ukraine to 35% now. That's substantially funding Putin's war chest. How does that sit with Indian people?
So I think, much of the focus on Putin's visit has been on the energy side, as you've noted. Modi has referred to energy security as a quote unquote a strong and important pillar of the relationship between both countries. This is not only referring to its crude oil purchases, but also other areas like nuclear power. Putin has referred to the largest civil Indian nuclear power project in India, which Russia is participating as a flagship project of both countries. And he's made an offer on providing uninterrupted shipments of fuel to India. Frankly, that's going to be much easier said than done, given the secondary sanctions and tariffs that have been imposed by the Trump administration on India. We've seen a drop in India's dependence on Russian crude since first the tariffs were imposed by the Trump administration in August, and then more recently the secondary sanctions that have been imposed on Russian oil companies Rosneft and Lukoil. So I think the direction of travel is towards a reduced dependence on Russian oil, a diversification of India's oil imports, including an increase in oil imports from the United States. But I think, again, going back to my earlier point, I think that they're clearly trying to diversify the economic relationship in order to essentially compensate for India's reduced dependence on Russian oil.
In terms of the military deal, why does India still rely so heavily on Russian equipment? We think leasing submarines, buying more jets, buying more missile systems.
So over 50% of India's in-service military platforms remain of Russian origin. This is partially a legacy issue that goes back to the Cold War period. India has been a preferred arms supplier or Russia has been a preferred arms supplier for India for many years, partially because it's able to, provide arms at more reasonable prices without end user constraints, often provide more sensitive technologies that other countries are unable or unwilling to provide. And there's been a growing emphasis on joint production, co-production of advanced systems. So I think that is a legacy that can be traced back to the Cold War. But again, as I said, there has been a push over time towards diversification, towards reducing India's dependence on Russian military hardware.
And in terms of creating a more multipolar world, is it right to see India as being in lockstep with Russia's aims, given its participation in the BRICS organization and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization?
Well, I think, yeah, they would argue, and President Putin has stated today that both countries are working on creating a more, quote unquote, more just and more multipolar world. Both countries have cooperated on several initiatives through several multilateral initiatives, such as the BRICS, for instance, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, various connectivity initiatives. There's something called the Chennai Vladivostok Maritime Corridor, an international north-south transport corridor. So both countries do collaborate on various multilateral initiatives. I would say that India is increasingly, I would say, out of sync with Russia's worldview. It wants to project an image as a non-Western, but not an anti-Western world power. It's interesting to note that Putin is visiting India the same month as India is set to conclude a free trade agreement with the European Union and possibly even the United States. And we've recently had the conclusion of a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. So how does one square that circle? The only way I think to do so is that India, I would say, still prioritizes its relationship with countries in the European Union, the United States, and the UK over that relationship with Russia, despite the optics of the Putin's visit to India over the last 2 days.
And finally, you talked about those trade deals there. I've traveled across India previously with British politicians, and everywhere we went, we were asked questions about visas. That's a really key part of these deals, isn't it? The deal that Donald Trump potentially will do, I mean, is visas going to be a sort of big demand for India? Is that something that they want in play to maybe try and pull them away a bit from Russia?
At a people-to-people level, there's more contact between India and the West, including Europe, the UK, and the United States, than there is with Russia. As the example I used, 10 times as many Indian students studying in the US than in UK. They're trying, I think Moscow and New Delhi are trying to correct that to some degree. We've seen the announcement of 2 new consulates, Indian consulates being opened in Russia. Russia's RT news network is establishing a bureau in India. There's a new visa schemes that have been announced, and a labor mobility agreement, which essentially establishes a framework for the legal migration of skilled Indian workers to Russia to essentially support Russia in sectors that are experiencing labor shortages, such as tech. So I think there is an attempt to sort of correct for that to the at the people-to-people level to some degree, but I think the long-term direction of travel, I would say, remains unchanged with India's deepening engagement with the West.
Well, Dr. Kshitij Bajpai, thank you very much for helping us look behind some of the pageantry we've seen today.
Thank you for having me.